Okay, thank you. Yeah.
All right. So welcome everyone to the September 19th meeting of the Housing and Community Development Committee. I'm calling this meeting to order and I note that we have a quorum present. So just real briefly before we get into the agenda, as those of you who were with us in July, you know that we created a task force to draft, a just cause eviction ordinance, and that task force is still at work. So we expect they're going to be reporting back to us at our October meeting, but staff is going to give us an update on their progress thus far, and then also the various provisions of the revisions to the landlord tenant ordinance that the committee has already is recommending. Those are being reviewed by the law department. And so we're waiting for their review before it comes back to this committee. So October will be a big meeting when we get back to the landlord tenant issues. So first on our agenda is public comment. And Marion, you want to tell us who we have?
Yes. Can you all hear me? Yeah. So we had some public comment written that were provided to the committee prior to the meeting.
Maybe we should do anybody who's here in person to give public comment.
Yes.
First. Oh, okay.
And actually that's the entirety of,
okay.
We have Tina Payton and then we have Dominic Foss.
Great. Oh. So Tina, would you like to come up to the podium?
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Also the task force, I don't know if this is part of the landlord tenants ordinance, but there was the mitigation fund. So I had talked to Alderman Reed and Ms. Williams after the meeting. And I believe strongly that in the landlord tenants ordinance should be for a requirement for tenants to have renters insurance. This is very important on many levels because you're talking about a mitigation fund of up to $2,500 a person after someone makes damages to the apartment. Does everyone understand that? So why should you wait until someone damages the apartment? What's going to happen is, I asked at the meeting, the city of Evanston would have to sign paperwork with the landlord to grant this money. So say the tenant comes in, damages your apartment past the security deposit, the city is offering a mitigation fund of up to $2,500. Well, why put yourself on the hook for tenants damaging a landlord's property? You can do this elimination of this process, which can be very costly to the city because I've had many tenants damage my property well over $2,500, and have them have renters insurance and have it fixed so that the landlord can put a claim against the tenant's insurance if they have damages over a set amount. What you're going to do if you have this kind of procedure, you're going to end up paying out a lot of money. You don't even know where the money's coming from because there was discussed at the meeting also that you have no idea where the money's coming from. And this could also help when, let's say there's a fire at my building. The tenant is not covered. Their things are not covered. If you require them to have renter's insurance, currently the city helps residents that are in fires and puts them up in a hotel. Perhaps if they have renter's insurance, their insurance could help mitigate some of those damages. So it's not just a one-way street here. I feel like everyone should have renter's insurance It would save a lot of people time and money, and it's very important. So I would encourage this committee to find very strong renters insurance and include that in the landlord tenants ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dominic Voss.
Hey, folks. It's
Hi.
been a little while.
Right.
I'll be really, really brief. I sort of just wanted to express some gratitudes to folks today. Open Communities was sort of asked to give our expert opinion on matters relating to upgrading the RLTO almost a year ago now. And, we didn't quite anticipate the things that have unfolded and some of the, interesting and productive conversations that have come out of this process. But as we near, I think, decision-making time in October and beyond for some of these matters, I just sort of want to remind the council of the urgency and importance of tenants' rights in Evanston. I want to thank a lot of the landlords that have Stephanie and Adam Vaughn, Richard Koenig, who by all accounts and measures is a landlord, but although one deeply connected to Open Communities, who stand, either on opposite sides of the issue or close to opposite sides of the issue, but nonetheless have engaged in really good, productive conversations around, making sure that we construct a law that avoids unintended consequences, that, as Councilmember Burns said early on, is aimed towards not just what's fair and balanced in terms of hearing out both sides, which is important in process, but what is just in the end result. So I just wanted to, thank the committee for that and express that Open Communities continues to be open to having conversations with landlords across the city to discuss just cause and other matters, and especially to the Just Cause Task Force. I know that work is difficult. Our tenant representative, Helen Cho, is here today and has been sitting in those meetings. And I know that Ugo and others have been doing the hard work of consensus building among some strong feelings. So just thank you for your time.
Great, thank you.
And that concludes public comment for today.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's get on to our agenda then. And the first item is approval of the minutes of our famous July 18th meeting. Would someone make a motion?
I would like to suggest a change on V.B. I believe. Forgot that we have microphones here. The committee voted to create the Just Cause Task Force, but it is composed of two committee members and 3 community members, not 3 committee members as it says here.
Right. And I think actually at the very end of the minutes, it kind of corrects that.
It did. Oh,
Maybe.
I missed that.
Right.
We'll make the necessary.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
I missed that. Thank you.
But that's an important detail. So thank you. Are there any other corrections or comments about the minutes? So do we have a motion to approve from those of you who were here?
I move approval of the minutes from the July 18th, 2023 meeting.
Thank you. And a
Meeting.
second.
Second.
Okay. Do we need to do a roll call since?
We usually do,
Okay, especially since some of us can't vote.
right?
Right.
That's true.
Okay.
Chair Revelle?
I
Abstain.
I abstain, I guess. So- 'Cause I wasn't there.
Councilmember Harry Karas?
Aye.
Lauren Berlin? Ugo Rodriguez?
Aye.
Joanne Zolome?
Aye.
Chloe Thurston? Aye. The motion passes with 4 vote in favor and 2 abstentions.
Great, okay, thank you. So now we need to, the suggestion is that we reschedule the date of our November meeting so it doesn't come right on top of Thanksgiving. And so the suggestion is that we meet the week before on November 14th. So would someone like to make a motion to do that?
I motion we move the November meeting to the 14th.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Then I think we can just do a voice vote on this one. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, no. All right, so we're rescheduled in November. And you're going to hear later in the meeting about quite a long list of issues that are coming to the committee and really requiring that we have an additional meeting suggested that we have that the first week in December. So,
And actually, I can go over that now if you'd like.
sure, yeah, why don't, that would be good.
Right, that'll give the committee background as to why we're requesting an additional meeting on December 5th. So that would essentially mean you would meet November 14th, December 5th, and December 12th. We looked at what we have slated for the next 6 months, including the projects that you're currently working on that will likely or potentially continue, as well as the required items that need to come before the committee based on HUD rules. And other projects that have started that will come to you. So through the next 6 months, on your plate to review will be the continuation of the RLTO, the just cause eviction, one-stop shop updates, the action plan for 2024, renewal of tenant landlord services for 24, the IHO waitlist management agreement renewal, the action plan discussion, CDBG application, the action plan allocation and approvals, home ARP application for funding, nonprofit facilities application presentation and decisions, the review and approval of the evaluation report for 2023, and picking up the work that we left off a little while back, but the IHO. Judging from that very long list of projects, while we don't have a clear agenda yet as to what the December 5th meeting will be, we feel that it would be very helpful to help you keep moving forward and make sure that we're not stopped in our tracks by the meetings in November and December that are going to require a lot of HUD items. And those are meetings we cannot change. We have deadlines to meet. Same for Q1. We have items that we will have to review and that we cannot move.
Yeah, go ahead. Question, Lauren?
Yeah, are you imagining that everything around just cause and landlord tenants will get taken care of in October? Is that the idea here?
I'm going to let Liz respond to that.
I think it's our anticipation that it will not be concluded in October. We will be presenting proposed language for the first time for the committee's review for public response and feedback on that. So I think it would be prudent for us to anticipate more than one meeting on that topic, in addition to the just cause recommendations coming out of the task force. So that is kind of the thought process behind adding the additional meeting to provide the space for the committee to really thoroughly discuss and consider those proposed amendments.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Then would someone like to make a motion that we have a December meeting on December 5th?
I will move that we add an additional meeting on that December 5th date.
And is there a second?
Is
Okay. So then, all in favor of adding a December 5th meeting to our schedule, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right, thank you very much. Now we are ready for a couple of more meaty items, an update, a semi-annual report about our landlord tenant services. And Marion, want to lead us off on that?
Yes, I'm just going to share items on the screen so we can all follow along. So this is our usual semi-annual report on the landlord tenant services that are provided by Metropolitan Tenant Organization. The standard report has been included in your packet. And it's showing that there was 264 cases for the first half of the year. This is through July. We've seen essentially the typical pattern that we've seen in previous year. Actually, numbers of calls have diminished a tiny bit, not enough to make it a real trend, but it has dropped down a tiny bit. We are seeing a slight change in the top 3 reasons for calls. It used to be the last couple years where leases, maintenance, and eviction. Eviction has been replaced with early terminations, and question about potentially getting out of leases. Or rent increases as an example, and whether there's any kind of like what are tenant rights around that essentially. MTO has been able to launch recently the new texting feature that we were hoping to add. They've been able to serve 12 households through that feature. They got some pretty good feedback from Northwestern as far as how helpful it will be potentially to help students. The chatbot, which was an automated way to help start requests for residents and get answers to the easiest question. The chatbot work has started, but right now we're holding that off until the updates to the RLTO are finalized, because a lot of the answers to that to those are going to be driven by what's in the ordinance essentially. So right now we're holding off a little bit on that. The Evanston call trends are generally very similar to the Chicago area trends. We're happy to hear that MTO has been able to participate in multiple events with Northwestern. They've already joined 1 or 2 events, I believe, and they're joining 5 additional events that Northwestern is organizing to be able to discuss with students about tenant rights and start contacts around that. And they've also provided tenant trainings in various buildings in Evanston, as well as helped some tenants organize in the last 6 months. I have Philip Devon that joined tonight. So if you have any question, he is right here to answer any question you may have.
Okay, committee members? Oh, yeah, Bobby, or Councilmember Burns.
Thank you. I popped on the MTO's website. Is Squared Away okay.
Yeah, so right now Squared Away is Chicago only. So what we're hoping to do is we put some dollars in the budget to make sure that we could update that for Evanston. Because essentially we don't have quite the same rules. So for it to be valid for Evanston, needs to be a new instance, and then the whole forms and response need to be updated.
And so what are Evanston tenants using now? When you said there's a new text feature, how do they access that feature?
They can text Evanston to 205-736-0293. That information is on the city website. We did the soft launch, and now we're going to do some outreach through the newsletter and social media to make sure that residents are aware of that. We do outreach on a regular basis, generally quarterly with the e-news, just to make sure that people are reminded that service exists. Yeah, so essentially it's currently on the website.
You know if there's a landing page for it? I'm trying to find it now.
It's under landlord and tenant resources.
Okay.
So if you search on the website for a landlord, or tenant, that should be one of the page that shows up first.
And then you're pushing it out through newsletters as well. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that page has a lot of information, and one of the projects for 2024 is to try to see if we can make some improvement as far as our web pages and how information is easy to find and accessible.
Okay. I think that is it for now. Thanks, Chair.
And this is available for every resident in the city of Evanston.
Tenant and landlords, yeah.
And what is it that you see mostly texted, or what is the text used for?
So right now, there's only been 12 household. Texting is to initiate contact. What we heard is originally the service was a hotline that was getting voicemails or picking up depending on the hours, and then would respond and call back people that called. Now, some people have off schedules or are not able to call during business hours. So we implemented the text feature so they could initiate contact during off hours. And if need be, would be able to continue that conversation through text or email to be able to get served without having to be on the phone Monday through Friday from 1 to 5.
Any other comments or questions?
Is this an increase in the number of contacts from other years, or is it about the same, you know?
I don't think it's an increase. No. I can double check right now, but if it is, it's not anything major. Yeah, it's actually a decrease from 21 and 2020.
There is.
Yeah, it's not a big decrease, but it's a small decrease, not enough to make it a trend, but it's a small decrease.
Okay, then I guess we're ready for our other update.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Do you want to come
Oh,
to
yeah.
the?
I did not bring enough business cards. But I have 3 or 4 I'll leave here, and please feel free to take one or write down information if you have questions about, or you have a constituent that comes to you. I'm very accessible, and if I can't help you right away, I'll be able to connect you with someone who can. So I think it'll be good to just have a direct contact with MTO you could reach out to anytime, and that should be me. So I'll leave those right here.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
In terms of the outreach to Northwestern, is the thinking there that like a large number of Northwestern students are tenant, like what sort of the emphasis on?
It's not necessarily an emphasis. It's just that sometimes the tenants in Northwestern are just students. That's their first time they're renting. And they're not always aware of what their rights are. And so having that contact and being able to make sure they're aware that service is available can be helpful for them.
Thank you.
So I just want to know, how were some of these issues resolved, or were most of them resolved, or can you speak to that?
Sure. So I can speak to a lot of the calls, like for instance, about early termination. The way it works, a lot of these calls come through to MTO's hotline. And some of the tools that our hotline counselors will provide beyond just the basic, here are your rights, here are your responsibilities of the parties. We'll also provide additional assistance such as template letters. So if the tenant wants to exercise one of their rights or write a certain letter, we'll provide a template letter that has the law and the appropriate language, which has been vetted by the Legal Center for Better Housing, who also helps us on a lot of these Evanston clients. So we do a lot of that. And then I run our eviction prevention program. So when tenants can't resolve things and they begin to escalate, we'll help them kind of mediate with the landlord and tenant. We'll kind of sit folks down and try to come to some sort of agreement that'll allow the tenant to stay and allow to try to make both parties as whole as possible without ending up in court or displacing a tenant ultimately. Of course, we can't resolve every problem, and we don't really know every outcome because a lot of outcomes take a long time to resolve and we don't have contact again with tenants. But for the most part, we're able to help a lot of tenants just with the initial information and get them set on the right track. And I do think one thing that isn't reflected in here is a lot of callbacks we get. So I think these are all initial calls, but we do talk to a lot of tenants multiple times, sometimes dozens over the course of a year, because they'll call back and say, hey, I sent the letter. This is what the landlord said. What should I do? So I think one of the best things we can provide is also just kind of real world advice about what has and hasn't worked in the past, and give people that perspective. I know Marion mentioned some of the buildings MTO has been organizing in. One thing we did recently in a building was bring out one of our old partners, Taft West, who's a very experienced property manager, to do a walk around with the tenants and the landlord. And really, he did a great job of bridging the gap, bringing folks together and allowing them to come to an agreement about what repairs will be made, how and when, and really everyone walked away happy. So, you know, that's not how it always turns out, of course, but those are a few examples of how we try to resolve those issues. And Squared Away, I will mention, I know it's been delayed, but one neat feature about that is it's just as useful for landlords as it is for tenants. Landlords can track every unit that they own, and add the tenant's information. They can completely communicate, submit repair requests, update those with photos, et cetera, et cetera. And it includes all those templates I mentioned that we may provide to a caller through that app. And it'll just populate those letters with their information, send it to the landlord, and they can communicate completely within the app. So we're excited to get that rolled out once the RLTO changes are done.
Councilmember Burns?
I think Councilman Haddock is.
Oh, okay, it's just a burn.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that MTO has been a really valuable resource for some of my constituents. I've had people come and contact me, not really knowing, also like there were, younger, students that are, first apartment, didn't really know what their rights were. So some of the pest calls I think are, directed, from people who contacted me, and, just having a resource that knows how to negotiate those situations was really helpful. So just want to thank you guys.
Thanks. Yeah, my mic is not.
Yeah, go ahead, yes.
I was just wondering if you could explain, if you could just say a little bit more about the lease category, because some of the other categories kind of bleed into it as well. And I was wondering what a sort of a typical, if there is a typical kind of request that you tend to get around leases, or if there's sort of a wide range, and just if so.
We certainly get, sure, we certainly get a lot of general questions about, is this provision legal, or can I do anything about this? And of course, everything is negotiable. So we try to give folks, tips about how they can have that conversation. But I think the majority of lease questions we get are around either they've received a termination notice or a non-renewal notice, or they're dealing with some problem, whether it is they can't pay the rent, or more often than not, it's a repair problem or a conditions issue, and they just choose to move out before the lease is up. We get a lot of those calls. And then what we try to do is help them come to some sort of agreement, because oftentimes tenants will move out of an apartment before the lease is up, and then they're, someone will come after them for that, the remaining on the lease. So those are a lot of kind of those lease terminations. And we're seeing a lot of those really kind of, it's a big increase that people can't afford. So they kind of have to make the choice of, can they negotiate something better, or will they move out? And then, a significant number of those are also just non-renewals for no reason. But if we look at our records, it's often because they've requested a repair or had some other issue that was unresolved. And then when the lease is up, it's not renewed. And so, that to us looks often kind of retaliatory, and we try to help, work out that issue, or, negotiate with the tenant. Usually that person will end up in our eviction prevention program.
Sure.
So are these ever multiply coded then? Can one case end up sort of under more than one of these different categories? Or-
Yes.
Okay.
They can. And I'm not the hotline coordinator, so I can't speak to whether that is the case here.
Yeah,
But
it
I
is.
know oftentimes when we get calls, we can select and check off multiple categories. It's rare that a person calls about a singular issue unless it's something like that lease question I mentioned, or, something about a security deposit.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Burns had another question, and then we'll get to.
Yeah, I guess just to follow up on that last point. So the 264 is not like unique individuals.
It's not,
okay.
It's the best way to be able to represent really the proportion of issues. So that's, when we worked on the reporting, that's what we used. So there could be a call that has multiple codes included in there.
Is there a way to, so my question is going to be, is there a way that MTO can report out on kind of unique members of our community served? The larger point, and based on what was said a moment ago, it kind of revealed something to me that I was trying to figure out, like, what concerns I had with this. And I think the main thing is, when you look at the type of reports we get for our social services committee, as an example, there's a lot more detail. And I think if we can, moving forward, get MTO to report out, maybe not the same, because I know that could be very burdensome, but with a little bit more detail, especially about outcomes and, you know, amount of evidence a resident served, just whatever details that they're already collecting on their end. If we can try to get them to report out more, I think it would be incredibly helpful for us as we move forward.
So we do track the number of unique cases. So for this time period, that would be 183. So that's the calculation that we do based on the data they provide for the cases. So that's something we could include. I think the reasoning not to include it in there was just to make sure we weren't confusing the numbers. But we could add that. As far as the outcomes, that's also something we had discussed initially when we designed the report. And as Phil mentioned, that can be tough because they very often get an initial phone call. Doesn't mean they get a follow-up to say, hey, thank you.
Yeah.
This is what happened. And so some of that can be a little bit challenging. It might be more anecdotal, but we could potentially add something around a narrative or something like that. The difference with social service committee reports that you're used to is that because it's grant management, there's specific reports with specific outcomes because those case managers are working day in, day out, and that's the report. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of hedged it by saying I wouldn't want them to report out the exact same things as the agencies that request funds, but I do think even if there's a way to code around what you just mentioned, maybe we come up with a code that reflects when someone enters, someone reaches out, but then we kind of lose track. There can be a code for that. I know in social services, there's another code that talks about when somebody exits from the program. So if somebody does call in and you're able to help them, we might call that an exit, similar to what we would when we're reviewing the social service agency. So it may take a few meetings to come up with a perfect fit for this arrangement, but I think more information, generally speaking, would be helpful.
And that's something we can discuss because as part of the texting feature being launched, we have to relook also at how we're gathering data to make sure that gets included in the report. So we can always discuss that.
Yeah, and the text feature is, I'm looking forward to square it away. I think that just enhances, builds on the text feature that we have now. Most, in my experience, MTO being involved could be the difference between literally like all out war between landlords and tenant and a little bit of break, where they can find common ground again. It could be the difference between a landlord, either delaying or deciding against evicting someone. It could be the difference from a tenant, withholding rent. I mean, and these are all, I'm drawing from real experiences that I've been involved in. So I don't want to waste this opportunity to say I think MTO is doing really good work. And I do look forward to anything that we can do to make it easier for people to just get those quick hit questions. We had another member of our community not too long ago where a landlord said that they could move in. They were starting to move in and then the doors were locked all of a sudden. They couldn't get their stuff. They couldn't continue moving in. I think it eventually worked itself out, but they were reaching out to me and other partners to see like, is this okay? What should I do? So it's that having the ability to get those type of questions answered quickly, understanding that, I don't know if there are always lawyers responding to those questions, but I'm sure there's some disclaimer that says, look, you should contact a lawyer, but here's some advice based on our experience. So y'all are doing a great job.
Well, thank you. And I will follow up with our hotline coordinator and Marion, because I know we do collect additional data. So I know even just if we started giving over and you can look and decide what is best for you guys with demographics and other things that I think may be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Hugo, I think you're next.
Yes, I do. I do have a couple of questions. And I also, like Councilmember Burns mentioned, I see the service that MTO provides to the community, serving as a buffer between landlords and tenants. And I think that is very commendable. But I also I'm a little troubled with the lack of clarity of your numbers here. When you said that lease includes repairs or maintenance issues, it also includes early termination and even eviction. So is this 84 number of cases for lease actually something else. And that will be great to have clarity. And on another point, so I just make it brief, is that now I stop and buy a packet of bubble gum and I get a survey asking me for feedback. How did I like it? So is there anything that you can implement to have, since you already have the information about that person that reached out to MTO, to have somebody doing the follow-up instead of waiting a passive way to have that person come in and say, hey, everything worked out, or no, this guy is not doing what he was supposed to do. Is there any way that you could have somebody following up with any interactions that you are in between to get more clarity as to what is it really that is transpiring in the community between landlords and tenants?
Sure, very valid concerns. And I think to your first question about the numbers, I think we'll be able to figure out a way to better parse them out, or at least show what, if people called about multiple issues, a way to reflect that in a more clear way, definitely. And I think we'll work that out and get that fixed as we add some more information to the next report. So you have a better idea of who's calling, where they're calling from, et cetera. And then as to the second question, it is mainly a resource problem that we have. You know, we are a staff of 10 and we have run a lot of programs, serve tens of thousands of tenants a year. So it is a struggle to do the follow-up. But we are getting a few community navigators through a program grant that we have, which I think we may be able to use some of that time of theirs to do some follow-up. I also think what we could do, which I don't think it dawned on us until you've brought this up, is certainly we can send out some automated surveys. We have everyone's email from Evanston that contacts us. So at the bare minimum, I think we could do some additional outreach, even automate that for people who call or go into our system to send a message and a follow-up, let us know how it's going, something like that.
Yeah, I think that
At
that
agreed
would
upon
create a
times.
clearer picture of the service that MTO brings to the community.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a great idea. We can certainly implement that.
Great, okay. Joanne, is that your light that's on?
Yeah, I was just wondering, can you document how many unique landlords were involved or buildings? Are there more complaints against certain buildings that reflect on certain buildings or landlords?
Yes, I know we certainly can show which landlords and how many calls. I know not every call may have the landlord's information in it. Sometimes for various reasons, tenants may not want to give it or don't know it sometimes. But we can certainly give that. I don't know exactly how that will look, but we'll have addresses and landlords attached, so we could report that and it would show how many calls have been received about each landlord. We can include that as well.
And Juan, is that your light?
Actually, that was along my next question.
Oh,
I just said
okay.
so. Okay.
Lauren,
I was just gonna say, it might be helpful to see the number of unique units that are served, as like separate, so that would like take out some of the confusion around how many things are being crossed.
Can you turn your mic on?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Sorry about that. It might be helpful to see the number of units that are served, right? If I understand, these are sort of sorted by issues as opposed, so you might have something that's in multiple categories, right? So if we're able to say, oh, this represents 246 calls, represents 153 units, right? Then that gives us some sense of scope.
Absolutely.
It's just.
okay. Well, I think a lot of good suggestions from the committee and look forward to, more detailed information at our next check-in.
Thank you. And don't forget, Councilman and anyone else, if you have one of those problems that needs immediate attention, you can
Mhm.
take this info of mine and you can reach out to me directly.
Mhm. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, back to you, Marion.
So
Oops.
the next item on the agenda is the semi-annual report for the IHO waitlist. That's a report that you'll have twice a year so we're reporting through July, and it gives you kind of a snapshot of where we're at with the IHO waitlist. Between January and July, 157 households have been added to the wait list. We saw the largest increases on the wait list in the 0 to 30% AMI and 51 to 60% AMI range since the last update, particularly with the local preference. I was happy to see we have seen a trend in seeing the lower income increased faster on the wait list, and we've seen a trend of the wait list growing faster as the program was initiated a few years ago. So as it becomes more known and we continue to do outreach and new buildings get built, there's more publicity, and so that has helped growing the list. It's important to remember that in a current iteration, the majority of the units are usually accessible to people at 51 to 60% AMI. CPI did additional outreach in the last 6 months. So it was interesting to see that we had a larger increase on the 51 to 60% AMI range. We also saw an increase on the higher range up to 80% AMI. Some of our units on the wait list are older units that were approved prior to the current IHO and have higher income. And while we know there's a need in the market, those kind of higher income are not always the ones thinking that they may be eligible for affordable housing. So the outreach for those units is not always as easy. So it was nice to be able to see an increase there so that there's a larger pool of people to draw from when units do become available. CPI is now managing 72 IHO and or affordable units. Some of those units were affordable units prior the original IHO that we have. And there's currently 9 units that are in the process of being leased up, including the building on 100 Chicago, which has a couple units at 80% AMI currently. Yes. In your report, what we tend to do is the top line items, particularly the 0 to 30%, is grayed out. It's a large chunk of some of our of the wait list, but that's usually those units would require a voucher to really be accessible for IHO. We do not have any IHO units that are accessible for people making less than 30% AMI. They would need to have a voucher for that. So when you're looking at the wait list, that's important to look at that. On this snapshot, you have unit information as far as the makeup of the existing units that are either occupied and being recertified by yearly by CPA, as well as the one that are being in the process of being rented up, whether they became vacant or they're new units. We also started tracking demographics when people are willing to share that information. That's why the numbers don't always add up per unit. And then you have some information about just the general makeup of the existing buildings, as well as what's going on with the units that are currently being in the process of being rented up.
Okay, Ugo, go right ahead.
Thank you. I have a question. Actually, I have a few questions, but the one I remember the most is, what's the reach? How do you reach out to these individuals or these families that are eligible or potentially be eligible to this housing unit? Is there any particular system?
The publicity or anything like that?
Yes.
So CPA does their own outreach, and I would like to note that Philip from MTO nicely volunteered to show up tonight, but was not invited, and so I didn't invite anybody from CPA. They're not here because they decided not to join. That's on me. We don't usually invite them for semi-annual meeting, only for the renewal and the yearly meeting. Usually the process, so CPA has done some events at the library. They have the social media outreach. They do some email blast. The city helps with that as well by doing kind of a quarterly e-news. Like we usually try to ping our communications team to make sure that on a regular basis, the program is mentioned. I think we could continue that outreach, and that's part of the reason why we're hoping that next year we can work a little bit more on that, particularly with a variety of income.
You know, it just made me think the comment I made to Phil from MTO that there's gotta be a better way to reach out to our community and so many things that the city is providing for its residents. I happened to just pay my will tax yesterday, and what a great opportunity to create a database for all our residents. We all have to pay some sort of taxes to the city at one point or another. So I think that that will create a better way to reach out, to inform the community and try to do it in a diversified way. I'll be happy to translate to Spanish if you don't have one, but I know you do. So it's just that it seems like, you know, the number of units is very limited, and the number of people that don't renew on those units is almost non-existent.
Yeah,
I mean,
the
they
turnover
all
is
stay there because
Mhm.
it's very helpful to their families, of course. So I think that more than anything, our efforts should be geared for creating more affordable housing in the city of Evanston. And this is just an indication that we need it. We really need it. And unfortunately, there are some other forces that might prevent more affordable housing to come into the city because of what we're doing in other areas. So that's about what I have to say at this point. Thank you.
I think some of the ideas you mentioned as far as using other way the city has to reach out to be able to share some of the positive program that exists or something, yeah, that we would also like to discuss at some point or leverage.
Right. In the past, I know that I have requested data on, you know, in my cases about housing almost all the time. And we really don't have it. And to me, it's just mind blowing that in this day and age, we don't have accessible data at our fingertips.
Right.
So just, I don't know.
We don't disagree. There's also a question of resources and staff time. But
always something to keep thinking of new ideas. right,
exactly,
Right, yeah,
we can keep chipping at it, of
right,
course.
okay. Councilmember Burns.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was reading this right. So how many people are currently on our wait list?
836.
Okay, as I thought. And then the 231 are Evanston residents, or they're at least
Residents and
Evanston
people
residents
with
at the
a
time.
Evanston preference. It could be people working in Evanston or other, but yeah, local
Or
preference.
is this like a preference of where they live or where they would?
It's community members that qualify as being part of the Evanston preference. The majority is going to be Evanston residents.
Okay.
It's the vast majority.
Are they referred, the members of our community on the waiting list, are they referred to any other programs while they wait?
I would have to get back to you on that.
And then in terms of the updates to our IHO ordinance, I think that's something that this committee
Yeah.
would discuss at some point. That's on the way?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that has been postponed for now due to everything you're currently discussing, but yeah, we're very anxious to start that again. It's probably coming to you soon in Q1 2024.
Okay.
Liz may be able to share more.
If you want to. And I only say that because, 836 is a big number.
Mm.
And we're not producing nearly enough, IHO affordable units. I don't think the marketplace is producing nearly enough, on Church and Darrow we're fighting a lawsuit right now from one of the neighbors. So it's like every time we try to produce affordable units, somebody's gonna try to get an injunction in court. The IHO ordinance isn't producing enough currently because we're, we haven't updated it in a while, and maybe we've taken it to as far as we can, but maybe we can increase the amount of units that we expect in developments. But these numbers tell me that it's certainly time to take a hard look at it again. So I'll be anxiously awaiting that discussion. That's all for now.
If you'd like, that is definitely something that staff is looking into as part of the IHO update, is looking at the definition of covered development, looking at the percentage of the minimum that would be accepted for projects. And you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said we have to make sure that we're balancing to not stifle, development in general. But I do think staff sees some opportunity, and we're hopeful that, ultimately this committee and city council will also see those opportunities to fine tune what has been a relatively successful program.
Thank you.
So somebody's light on, is that? Okay. Councilmember Harry.
I'll just add, as we're looking at the comprehensive plan going forward, parking restrictions, I think, is a big key piece of this. Listening to a really interesting audiobook talking about parking. And I think it's just as expensive to build a parking spot as it is, to do a floor of housing. And I think that's something that is really hindering us when we talk about building units and bringing people to town. And I hope that's something we can discuss in the future.
If I could welcome that conversation at any point. And it is definitely on the laundry list of things that need to be tackled with the upcoming zoning code rewrite. So look forward to more conversations about that topic.
Yes, Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a quick question, and I may be asking something I should already know, in which case I apologize. But given that we have a pretty long wait list, does it make sense to be doing much outreach? I mean, because we want to manage people's expectations. It just feels a little awkward to be soliciting interest in something when we know there's nothing we can actually deliver on.
So that's a very actually interesting question. It does make sense because one thing to remember is everybody that's on the wait list that's going to get contacted whenever a unit comes on the market may not be in a position to end their current lease, may not want the unit, may not be interested in the location of that unit. And so when you see, as an example, 91% on the 51 to 60% AMI list, sometimes that's not enough. Because there could be a configuration in the household size, there can be a configuration in their preferences, and a variety of factors that makes it that, especially for some of those threshold, because we still need to do some outreach.
So that makes total sense, but does the outreach sort of caveat that and manage it? Okay. I'm just thinking here about, we're at this time in our community when housing is such a challenging issue anyways, and there's such a dire need for affordable housing. And so it just seems like something where we have to be thoughtful about the messaging. Like, this is here for you. You can get on the wait list.
Right. And it's that's something we discuss frequently with SEPA as far as the outreach. One of the discussion we had as well was how to do targeted outreach for higher incomes. Those units are affordable for those people that need it. They're greatly reduced, but they may not be perceived as affordable to a family that's at 30% AMI. So having the right approach and messaging, is definitely kind of a back and forth in a discussion around that.
Okay, back to you, Councilmember Burns.
To that point, and then I have one other quick question. I think as long as I think there's also an argument to say that the understanding the need helps us respond better to it. And I think if we communicate that somehow when they're filling out the list, not to say that that's our number one goal, we want to house people, obviously, but also it helps us have these discussions, when we can better understand the needs. So I just wanted to add that. But I don't know if we're calling it a tiny house community or efficiency home community, but that's in the 7th ward, correct?
Yeah, yeah, it's a little neighborhood.
Okay,
Right.
did the developer talk about what AMI those homes would likely, what the AMIs of the
Right,
people
well,
would likely
they're-
purchase those homes?
They're not going to be strictly affordable in the sense of, eligible for SEPA to take care of, but he's talking about them being what's the word? Attainable. So
Did he say like 80 to 100%?
no,
Did he
he's
use
re- he's
AMI?
really-
or did
He's
he
really
use some
not
other-
talking
Okay.
AMI. He's just he's thinking they're going to be pretty small
Okay.
and priced to be attainable for people without a big income. So
Yeah, because
like
when we talk about affordability, I know for SEPA and HODC and those organizations, they look at it in the way the federal government does. And the federal government obviously has its attention
Mhm.
mainly on people making up to 60% AMI, maybe a little higher than that. But I think as a city, when we think about affordability,
Mhm.
we think about even 80 to 120%, certainly 80 to 100%.
Mhm.
And I know there was some pushback about the cost of the proposed cost of those homes, but I think it serves
Mhm.
an important
Right.
part of our community that are also at risk of being priced out of Evanston and that need opportunity. So that's so separate from this discussion. I would be really interested to know what AMI levels we think.
Right.
I
yeah.
would suspect they're right. And I know this is rentals and not
Mhm.
purchasing homes, but I would imagine they're in that, in that underserved group that we see in our IHO ordinance even.
Well, I mean, I think there are people who are struggling to find a place, they want to buy a house.
Yeah.
But they're struggling to find something they can afford.
Right.
And these would be, so it's not like you're going to have to show your income level to be able to buy it, but rather it will be priced attractively to someone with, a lower income.
Yeah, and I wonder if we could use whatever and I could do the math too, just whatever the cost is, and 30% of the income, I think would still apply for home buyers as well, but I'll figure that out. I just wanted to bring that up, but that's all, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. And that project has to go through a whole big process
For
to the
sure,
land
yeah,
use
yeah.
commission and.
Yeah, hopefully I emphasize proposed. It's just
Right,
being
right,
proposed and it
exactly,
hasn't
yeah.
been approved.
Yeah, no. Yes,
Yeah,
on
grant, yeah.
grant, yes, right.
If I may add
Sure.
something to Councilmember Burton's point, which is important. On the wait lists, it doesn't always look like there's a really high wait list for larger units. Part of that is because SEPA is aware that they have very few of those units, so that tends to happen as part of the conversation when people sign up or come to workshops. And so those numbers may be under what they really are, because people that are looking for 3-4 bedroom units may not even bother,
Right.
essentially, because they know there's going to be a very long wait list.
To go back to that question about the Evanston preference, so is that just something that we're keeping track of for our own information, or does that do they have
They
actually?
get preference.
They really do get preference.
Right, so there's the full wait list.
Right,
When a unit becomes available, the time you've been on the wait list will matter, but also the local preference, the household size. They look at all those different factors, but the prioritization within the groups that are eligible, there is a local preference.
okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. And then breaking it out into the two groups of IHO existing units versus affordable units. It's that those buildings are just grouped that way because they were built or they came into the system under a different
Yeah,
mechanism.
it's really just language. They're not technically IHO unit, so we didn't want to put them under the chart under the IHO units. And then sometimes we do get questions around how many units did the IHO really
Right.
bring about? And so that's helpful to keep track of it that way, to have them separated so that we don't forget to count them out.
Right, great, okay.
Technically speaking, a lot of those affordable units were part of an IHO principle. It's
Mhm.
just there wasn't a formalized ordinance at the
Got
time.
it, right,
So
okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, any other questions? Okay, all very good stuff. Okay, then I think we are ready to move on to staff updates. Is that you, Marion, or Liz, or?
Do you want to
Happening.
do you want to start and then I'll wrap it
Sure.
up?
So I was just gonna give a staff update on the nonprofit facilities application for funding that will be coming your way soon-ish, not so soon, but we wanted to give you a heads up on what is happening. And I just need a second. So essentially, we're gonna be, for the first time in 2 to 3 years, we're going to be reopening applications for nonprofit to apply for funding for improvement to their facilities that are open to the public. That is something that we were doing fairly regularly pre-COVID. We had to take a break during COVID and we're happy to come back to it finally. The general schedule is slated, the applications were open earlier this month. Letter of intent to apply for projects are due this week from the organization. They'll then move on into the next step of the process, which is completing the full application by November 3rd. They can apply for a minimum of $25,000 and up to $125,000. We have a general budget of about $250,000 of CDBG funding to award. We're putting a maximum of 5 award for this cycle. This is the maximum range of project staff can really handle. It may be less depending on the application and the committee's perspective. After November, during November and December months, staff will work with the applicants to answer any question and work through kind of any potential issue to identify how shovel ready the projects are, what is needed to be done, and whether they're really truly ready to be awarded funding. And then we are projecting to come to this committee in January with the project's presentations. And as well as a staff evaluation of those projects. And then to have in February discussion and allocation of funding if possible. And that's I need to pull up a report. We are putting together a evaluation chart that we will follow to be able to assess the projects. And that will be included as part of your January meeting. Some of those components will be requirements for CDBG funding. Those are very strict and very specific. As an example, projects we need to make sure they're going to be used for the next 5 years if we're using CDBG funding. So there's a few things we need to look at. And so, yeah, essentially that's the plan for this.
And the nonprofits that apply all need to be based in the CDBG census tracts, or?
They need to serve a majority of population that is eligible for CDBG funding. They could be presumed eligible based on the category of people they're serving.
Okay.
Victim of domestic violence is an example, is presumed eligible. Homeless teens is one of them as well. We are going to collect where they're located. They need to be serving CDBG eligible population. So they could be located elsewhere, but they have to serve eligible population.
Okay. That sounds like a very interesting challenge for us.
Yes.
So you all will cull the applications to make sure they're all eligible, and then we'll just review the ones that.
Yeah, so we will go through all the one of the biggest item to look at as well is making sure that the awardees project is really feasible and they're going to be able to follow CDBG regulation, that they're going to be able to get a contractor that can report on sections, like Section 3 probably won't be eligible because it's under $250,000, but there's a lot of added administration that they need to be able to show they're going to be able to carry. There's reporting. It's not just simply allocating a grant and that's it. There's a little bit of a heavy lift. So staff needs to work with the nonprofit to make sure they can actually comply with that. And as well, we need to make sure that the project is truly ready and that it's going to happen in the timeline that we have to spend the funds, because we don't want to lose those funds.
Complicated. Yes, Councilmember
I
Brown.
just wanted to make sure I understood. I was checking through the packet, the eligible uses of the funds. Could you go over that once more?
So it's for the construction or rehabilitation of nonprofit facilities that are serving the public in a majority of eligible population. So an example would be a organization that is serving homeless people or domestic violence victims or any other population that could be eligible and needs some repairs. They might need a new roof. They might need some upgrades. They might need a small addition. They may be relocating, or there's a variety of projects that could be
Are they
eligible.
limited to are these funds limited to a certain area, like a CDBG area, or they could be used across the city?
We're going to be looking at where they're located. The biggest requirement is making sure they're serving
Okay.
a minimum, a majority of eligible population, ideally more than a majority, and a high percentage.
And do we will we cap the dollar amount for each grant so we can
Yeah, the range
For people?
is they have a minimum of $25,000 and a maximum of $125,000 to apply. We provided a big range because we didn't know how many people would apply, and even if we have 10 applicants, it doesn't mean that those 10 projects would be eligible, able to meet the requirement and shovel ready.
okay.
So we provided a large range. You may end up with a mix of projects, some larger. We had to put a threshold because there is a lift with CDBG and there's under $25,000 is just not worth it, whether it's for the organization or the staff, with the amount of work that's required with compliance.
And what's the total pot of money?
Currently $250,000.
Okay.
Some of the criteria that we may use for reviewing those applications is the project feasibility, their ability to meet federal funding requirement, as well as city zoning and building requirement, how realistic their budget is and how well put together they are. If it includes David Bacon wage consideration, their sustainability, the applicant and the project sustainability, meaning they need to be in place in the next 5 years because they have to give back the money otherwise. Whether they've received funding in the past application, whether they're truly ready, what the community benefit and return on investment would be, the benefit to the target population, and we've added a component for environmental or positive health impact as well.
And you said we only 250,000, is that what you said?
Yeah.
The 125 concerns me because I can see someone putting, I can't really think of something off the top, but something that costs a little bit more, not getting that because there's a lot of interest.
Mhm.
And maybe there was a smaller project that they also could have submitted for. So I wonder if there's any value in allowing people to submit two proposals, or to say like, here's a smaller thing we can do if there's not a lot of interest, but here's this really big thing that we'd love to do if we can. I don't need an answer on that now, but.
No, that's
something
okay.
to- Yeah,
We haven't had that discussion yet. Jessica Wingender on the team as well, Lindsay Wade, are going to be pretty heavily involved with the applicants. There's a lot of communication during that process. That's not come up, but yeah, that's something staff can take into account or communicate.
and only because
eventually.
it's such a small dollar amount that,
Mhm.
yeah,
Could run out fast.
exactly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. I think you answered this, but I want to just make sure I understand. So you mentioned that sort of feasibility and whether or not they're ready matters. And you mentioned that you will work with them to try to assess that. And is that, just to clarify, all happening before we have any discussions about? Okay, so
Oh, yeah.
that's a back and forth iterative process. with-
Yeah, the
Okay.
application is designed to have all those questions included, and that's due November 3rd. And then after that, there's 2 months before it even comes to you. And then on top of that, the applicant will be there to present their project. And so you'll be able to ask them further questions as well before you even get to the meeting where potential allocation could be done, which would be in February. Yeah, and especially with those this is something that this specific committee hasn't done yet. It's the first time we're doing it in a couple of years, as I was mentioning, and we're likely to see a variety of projects. So we want to make sure we bring you some information around that, and we can highlight some of that for you.
This is perhaps unanswerable because we're in the after times, but in the before times, before COVID kind of, put a halt to these projects, what would have been a normal range of number of applicants?
My understanding is that, and I wasn't part of city staff at the time, but my understanding is that there was maybe 3. And oftentimes it was a mix of projects, sometimes smaller, they'd be less than $100,000. So it was a slightly different process. Yeah. So it was a slightly different process. There might be 3 applicants and all 3 would get funding. Than what we're working with this time.
Because we have less money, or you think there's more demand?
We have more money than in the previous year because we have 250 instead of the 100,000 plus. But we also had about 13 to 15 people show up to the webinars. Now, there's a good chance not all of those organizations are going to be applying due to a lot of part of those meetings is going over the requirements and them understanding whether or not they want to go through it or whether their project would be eligible. But yeah, we'll have a little bit more information in the future around what we expect the number of applications. And in November, we should have some information around the total applications.
Great. So we'll look for another update then.
Thank you.
And then Liz, are you doing the other?
Yeah, I can quickly give an update on the RLTO. So as Chair Ravel mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, our law team is still reviewing proposed changes to the draft ordinance that will include the 15 items that the committee has previously discussed, in addition to edits that either clarify, modernize, or align the ordinance with our neighboring jurisdictions, such as Chicago and Cook County. We fully recognize this is the first time that the committee will be receiving proposed language, and it is quite extensive in terms of the edits. And so we anticipate that the October meeting will be primarily just to review and go through the proposal in depth, and an opportunity for the committee to ask clarifying questions, make suggestions for amendments to language. And we anticipate, based on that discussion, bringing this item back for the committee's recommendation in either the November meeting or that special December meeting that you all just scheduled this evening. Our hope is that we really can get that recommendation in December, because as Marian mentioned, there is a long list of items that are following this particular initiative. And the committee has spent many months discussing the items related to this particular update. If that is not achievable in November or December, I think the plan B is really to look at additional special meetings in order for us to wrap this particular initiative up and make a recommendation ultimately to City Council for their consideration. So happy to answer any questions on the RLTO, and then I'd like to just provide a quick update on the task force associated with that work as well. Any questions on the RLTO update specifically?
This is maybe more a request, and I may be stating the obvious, but I was at the June meeting and then unfortunately I missed the July one. But based on my experience at the June meeting, when we do the October meeting, I think it would be helpful to just reiterate throughout to everyone that this is a learning opportunity and that the committee is going to ask questions, not because we don't understand, but because we want to make sure we're covering all possible. Like, I think we would benefit from trying to have goodwill. And so I think being able to effectively communicate that we are asking questions, not because we are ignorant, but because it is our job to be thorough. Like, I think there was an assumption, I believe someone at some point told us at June that we didn't know what we were talking about, some of the members of the committee. And I think that antagonism doesn't help anyone to achieve anything. So I don't know. Just as we frame up that October meeting, I think making clear that we're having this discussion to get things answered, not making a recommendation tonight so much as trying to understand the issue. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And I think that's, why staff was anticipating it wouldn't be one meeting and done. Because it's really not fair to anyone, including the community, to be able to have a few days to review ordinance language, which isn't always the easiest to digest.
Exactly.
And this particular ordinance has a lot of legal terminology within it. It's very complex. So we're trying to, as much as we can, minimize that legalese within the ordinance, but I think inevitably it will remain. And to your point, absolutely. I think it's a responsibility of staff to be able to clearly articulate the proposed changes, kind of the reason or rationale behind those particular changes, and afford the opportunity for the community and committee members to ask questions for clarification. Taking the more iterative approach, I think, will ultimately result in a better product.
Exactly.
And I think that's ultimately what I'm hearing from you.
You are saying better what I am trying to say. I think it's just not in anyone's best interest to go into that without an assumption of goodwill.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. I just wonder, in terms of legal, does state law supersede? Does state law supersede Cook County law on some of these issues?
So because Evanston has its local landlord tenant ordinance, Cook County's does not apply.
Yeah. Right.
And the city is responsible for ensuring that our regulations are also not less restrictive than state law or federal law. So that's kind of how the hierarchy of things work. So in terms of the task force, in July, the Just Cause Task Force was created. And it consists of 2 housing providers, 2 tenants, and a subject matter expert. And they were charged with essentially establishing the Just Cause ordinance and bringing that back to this committee for consideration at your October meeting. So to date, the task force has held 3 meetings, which we've kind of landed on a regular rhythm of weekly meetings every Friday from 2:30 to 4 p.m. here at the Civic Center. Those meetings are held on the 2nd floor in room 2404. And they're also streamed via Zoom. So if you're not able to attend in person, those are available to view via Zoom. We are maintaining a website, which I will make the note tonight that there needs to be some updates to that just based on recent events. And we also will post the previous recordings of those Zoom meetings. So if you want to catch up on the discussions of the task force, that is fully out there. In addition to draft language that the committee is working through, making kind of iterative edits to the proposal as they go. And similar to what we just discussed with the RLTO, this would come back for kind of a report out from the task force in October. It is our anticipation that there will be draft language at that meeting for introduction and conversation. So make sure you've, had a lot of rest before the October meeting because it's probably going to be lengthy. And again, anticipating and recognizing the fact that this is a topic that the committee really hasn't fully talked about and kind of directed the creation of the task force. We do anticipate that there will be the need to have a secondary meeting, which again would be either that November or December meeting. Depending on how those conversations go, proposals from the committee to refine the language. Staff will work through that, but recognizing kind of the long list of items. Again, I feel like I'm a broken record tonight. Ideally, from our perspective, having that recommendation from the committee in November, or that meeting in December would be ideal just to move things forward. But again, that's at the discretion of the committee to determine.
I just wondering, can we have a list of the members? I thought we.
Sure.
got that.
Yeah, so on the project webpage, the members are listed. So it includes council member Reed, who is the chair and a tenant representative on the committee. HCDC member Rodriguez is also a member, and he's also a landlord. Noreen Kim, she's the director of housing law practice and also North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic. I'm sorry if I'm butchering her agency representation. Landlord Eric Passett, and then tenant Helen Cho, who's here this evening.
So we just can go to the city of Evanston and put in.
If you go to the City of Evanston website, and then up in the right-hand corner, there's a search. If you type in RLTO 2023 update, it'll take you to the residential tenant landlord ordinance update page. And on there, you will see all of the information. As I mentioned, we will get those videos of the previous task force meetings updated. Actually, during this meeting, I was emailing Lindsay requesting that to be done. So look for that tomorrow to be updated with all of the materials, the agendas, everything that has been shared out at that meeting. I think the task force has been very intentional about wanting this to be a transparent process, which is why, the meetings are via Zoom in terms of participation, in addition to being recorded so folks can take a look back at what has been discussed.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know this was shared at the beginning of this conversation, but I think it is important to continue to center the information or data that is driving some of these recommendations. I think we really need to keep that front and center, both from the landlord's perspective, but also from the tenant's perspective. I'm probably a bit more useful on the tenant side of things. And I think whether you look at what was shared with us today, that we have 836 people on the waiting list, 200 and something of which were Evanston residents. That is a data point that tells me that there is a need here. Whether you look at the social service committee that we just had, and you look at 3 out of the 4 agencies that reported that day, the Moran Center, Connections, of course, and Family Focus all reported that the number one challenge that their participants are facing is in housing, and on and on and on and on, right? And so what I want to make sure that before we engage in that discussion, in the same spirit of what was said a moment ago, that we're just centering the right things. I think oftentimes some people feel like it's a solution looking for a problem. That is 100% not the case when it comes to housing in the city of Evanston. But I think we just need to revisit that before we engage in these discussions at every opportunity. So I just we should just have our targets really clear at the top of that packet. Here's what information and data points are driving some of these recommendations, and then we should move forward from there.
Yeah, thank you. Any question? Yes, Ugo.
Thank you. On that note, and I totally agree with Councilmember Burns again, I think that the emphasis should be placed on affordable housing. That's what Evanston needs. And I think that the more we look at the amendment to the landlord tenant ordinance, I truly think that it could be more jeopardizing to that endeavor to bring more affordable housing into the city than it would aid in the long term. In the long run, I think that could be detrimental to our achievement of more affordable housing. So I think that I'm very honored to be in the task force, and I'm hoping that I'm bringing that input into it, not antagonistic as to tenants' rights, because I think that everybody in this world has a right to be happy. That's what we are made for, try to be happy. And housing is a basic need of everyone. But how do we achieve more affordable housing for those who have less? And that's kind of more of my concern than trying to change things that are working already. I'm getting confused. So that's all thank you.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate your being on the task force. Yeah, Joanne.
Yeah, well, as a realtor, I know that we are short something like 5 to 6 million housing units in this country. So, it's, and our problem is we only have so much geography to build on, or something. But, I haven't looked at what the ordinance is now, but I wondered as I was reading through things again, what is the enforcement mechanism for the city? What will it be in some of these issues?
So in terms of enforcement of the provisions, typically these end in, circuit court. So typically the court system is the largest enforcer of the ordinance provisions, I would say.
Are there any other questions or comments? Well, we certainly have a big October agenda ahead of us.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I think we've gotten through our agenda, and thank you all very much for being here this evening. And our next meeting is October 17th. So look for a big packet and get a good night's sleep the night before.
I'm gonna move my party to the city council.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah.